There is a distance from Earth where you stop being an astronaut and start being something else. Something no word in any language was built to describe. A human being so far from every other human being that light itself takes more than a second to carry your voice home. Victor Glover crossed that distance on April 1st, 2026. He did not cross it as a passenger. He crossed it as the pilot of the Orion spacecraft. Hands on the controls during a manual piloting demonstration on day 4, proving that a human being could fly this machine in deep space. That was his job. That was why NASA chose him. Not because of what he represents, though he is the first black man to travel beyond low Earth orbit, but because he is a former F-18 pilot, a graduate of the Air Force Test Pilot School, and the kind of person who has already spent 168 days in space and walked outside a spacecraft 4 times. Over the next 10 days, Glover would go farther from Earth than any human in history. He would watch the planet disappear behind the moon. He would photograph terrain that no human eye has ever seen. And he would return through a heat shield that had already failed once before. To understand what that means, you need to know who Victor Glover was before he ever left the ground. He grew up in Pomona, California. He flew F-18s off aircraft carriers for the United States Navy. He graduated from the Air Force Test Pilot School, the place where the military sends its best pilots to find the edges of what aircraft can do. NASA selected him in 2013, and in 2020, he became the pilot of SpaceX Crew Dragon's first operational flight to the International Space Station. He spent 168 days on that station, conducted 4 spacewalks, logged hundreds of hours operating systems in microgravity. But the International Space Station orbits at 250 miles above the Earth. You can still see cities from there. You can still feel, in some psychological sense, that home is right below you. What Glover was about to do was fundamentally different. He was about to leave Earth's gravitational neighborhood entirely. And nothing about his 168 days in low orbit could fully prepare him for what that feels like. At 6:35 in the evening on April 1st, 2026, the Space Launch System rocket lifted off from Launch Complex 39B at Kennedy Space Center. 8.8 million pounds of thrust. The ground shook, the water around the pad turned to steam. And inside the Orion capsule, 4 human beings were pressed into their seats by a force that would not let go for 8.5 minutes. Victor Glover, pilot; Reed Wiseman, commander; Christina Koch, mission specialist and the first woman to travel beyond low Earth orbit; Jeremy Hansen, Canadian Space Agency mission specialist and the first non-American to leave Earth orbit. 4 people, 1 capsule, 10 days. Let me tell you what that capsule is like. 330 cubic feet of habitable space. That is roughly the volume of 2 minivans. The Apollo command module was 210 cubic feet. So yes, Orion is bigger, nearly 60% bigger. But when you put 4 adults, their sleeping bags, their food supply, their exercise equipment, their waste management system, and every piece of hardware required to keep them alive for 10 days in deep space into that volume, the word spacious does not apply. The crew slept in bags attached to the walls, not in bunks. Not in designated quarters, bags velcroed to the cabin interior. And it was cold. Glover said he wished they had brought different sleeping bags. The temperature inside Orion drops when the spacecraft is oriented away from the sun, and the thermal management system was not designed for comfort. It was designed to keep the electronics alive. The humans were secondary. On day 3, the toilet malfunctioned, not in a dramatic way, not in a way that endangered the mission. But from that point on, only solid waste could be deposited into the commode. Think about that for a moment. 4 people, 200,000 miles from the nearest plumber, and the bathroom half works. When Mission Control noticed The windows were heating up on day 3. They asked the crew to remove the window shades. The sunlight that poured in was blinding, so the crew improvised. They taped t-shirts over the windows. That is not a metaphor. Real t-shirts, real tape. 200,000 miles from Earth. And the solution to a thermal problem was laundry. Each astronaut exercised for 30 minutes every day using a flywheel, a cable-based device installed below the side hatch. Squats, deadlifts, rowing, not for fitness, for survival. Without gravity pulling on your bones, your skeleton begins to dissolve, your muscles atrophy. 30 minutes a day is the minimum to slow the process, not stop it, slow it. And every meal was built around tortillas and flatbread. No crumbs allowed. In microgravity, a breadcrumb does not fall to the floor. It floats into a ventilation intake, or an instrument panel, or someone's eye. Tortillas solved that problem decades ago. The solution has not changed. But here is where the experience inside Orion diverges from anything that has happened on the International Space Station. On the ISS, you orbit the Earth every 90 minutes. You see 16 sunrises a day. The planet is always right there, filling your window, blue and white and close. On Artemis 2, the Earth was shrinking. Every hour, it got smaller. And there is no psychological training that fully prepares you for watching your entire world become a dot. By day 4, Glover performed the manual piloting demonstration. He took the controls and flew the Orion spacecraft by hand. This was not symbolic. This was a test. If the automated systems fail on a future mission, a human pilot needs to be able to take over. Glover proved it could be done. He's a test pilot. Testing things is what he does. On day 5, the crew donned their Orion Crew Survival Systems suits and verified all seals. On day 8, they practiced building a radiation storm shelter inside the cabin, not with specialized materials, with whatever was on board, bags, panels, equipment. Because if a solar particle event hits while you are 250,000 miles from Earth, there is no magnetosphere to protect you. The only shield is whatever you can stack between yourself and the radiation. And they had to build it fast. Scientists collected saliva samples from the crew before, during, and after the mission. Not for curiosity, for data. They wanted to measure how deep space radiation affects the human immune system. How isolation at that distance changes biomarkers. The results are still being analyzed. But the fact that the question needed asking tells you something about how little we know about what happens to a human body that far from home. On April 6th, the Orion spacecraft reached the Moon. Closest approach, 4,067 miles above the lunar surface. For 7 hours, the crew flew over the far side, the hemisphere that permanently faces away from Earth. No human being had ever observed these features with their own eyes from this close. Glover and the crew photographed the terrain through a 400mm lens. Vavilov Crater, sitting on the rim of the much older Hertzsprung Basin, where smooth inner plains transition into violently rugged outer terrain. Glushko, a crater 27 miles across with white streaks radiating outward for 500 miles, bright scars blasted across the grey. And Rhinogama, a swirl on the near side that scientists still cannot fully explain. A bright pattern on the surface connected to a localized magnetic anomaly. No crater, no volcanic origin. Just a magnetic ghost written on the regolith. And nobody knows exactly how it got there. Glover described the views as unreal. He used the word sci-fi, and he was not exaggerating. The far side of the Moon, nothing like the near side. Fewer dark plains, more craters, a thicker crust. The geological dichotomy between the two hemispheres is one of the oldest unsolved puzzles in planetary science, and Glover was looking at it through a window. Then it happened, at 6:41 in the evening, Eastern Daylight Time, on April 6th, the Earth began to set behind the Moon, not a metaphor, a literal Earth set. The planet dropped below the lunar horizon as Orion flew behind the Moon, and for the next 40 minutes, there was no communication with mission control. No signal, no relay, complete silence. Think about what that means. Every person who has ever existed, every voice, every radio frequency, every satellite, every signal of any kind, was on the other side of the Moon, and 4 human beings were on this side, alone. The last time humans experienced that silence was Apollo 17 in December of 1972. 54 years. And then, as if the universe wanted to remind the crew exactly where they were, the Sun, the Moon, and the spacecraft aligned, a solar eclipse. Not the kind that lasts 2 minutes over a narrow path on Earth. This one lasted 54 minutes, nearly an hour of totality. The Sun's corona, its outermost atmosphere, became visible as a bright halo around the Moon's edge, the kind of view that ground-based astronomers spend lifetimes chasing and get for seconds. Glover had it for almost an hour, at 7:07 in the evening on that same day. Orion reached its maximum distance from Earth, 252,760 miles. The previous record belonged to the Apollo 13 crew, who reached 248,655 miles in April of 1970. But Apollo 13 went that far because their mission failed, an oxygen tank exploded, and the free return trajectory that saved their lives happened to carry them farther from Earth than any human had ever been. Glover went that far because the mission worked 4,105 miles. That is the gap between the old record and the new one. It sounds small when you say it. It is not. It is the difference between an accident and an intention, between a crew fighting to survive and a crew fulfilling a plan. Now the crew had to come home. And this is where the story takes a turn that very few people know about. When Artemis 1, the uncrewed test flight, returned to Earth in December of 2022, the Orion capsule used a technique called skip re-entry. The spacecraft dips into the upper atmosphere, bleeds off speed, bounces back out, then dips in again for the final descent. It spreads the thermal load across the passes. Elegant, in theory, but after splashdown, engineers found unexpected char loss on the heat shield. Pieces of the ablative material had come off in ways the models did not predict. That discovery changed everything for Artemis 2. NASA modified the re-entry trajectory. Instead of the full skip, dipping in, bouncing out, dipping in again, they chose a more direct descent angle that reduced time in the thermal environment where the damage had occurred. The skip was the problem, between the 2 dips into the atmosphere. Heating rates dropped just enough for gases to build up inside the ablative material without being able to escape. Remove the skip, remove the trapped gases, at least, that was the theory. No crew had ever ridden this profile back from lunar distance. The heat shield had to hold 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, 25,000 miles per hour. Without that shield, the capsule would not slow down. It would burn. There is no backup. There is no abort. Once you commit to re-entry, the heat shield is the only thing between 4 human beings and incineration. It held. On April 10, 2026, the Orion capsule splashed down in the Pacific Ocean off the coast of San Diego, 10 days after launch. 252,760 miles later. 4 people, alive, floating in the water. Glover said something afterward that stayed with me, he said. It does not change it. It absolutely reaffirms that we live on a fragile planet in the vacuum of space. He was not talking about an abstraction. He was talking about something he had seen with his own eyes. From a distance no human had ever reached, the Earth looked exactly like what it is. A small, thin-skinned world in an incomprehensibly large void. What makes this mission different from Apollo is not the technology, though the technology is better. It is not the distance, though the distance is farther. It is who went. In 1972, every human being who had ever left low Earth orbit was an American military pilot, white, male. That was the filter. In 2026, the crew that went farther than any of them included the first black man, the first woman, and the first non-American to cross that threshold. Victor Glover did not frame it as a racial milestone. He said this is human history, not black history. But the fact that it took 54 years to send a crew that looks like humanity tells you something about what took so long. Artemis 3 is next, the mission that will land the first woman on the lunar surface. But between now and then, engineers have to solve the heat shield. They have to explain the Charlos. They have to decide whether the modified trajectory is the permanent solution or whether they can fix the skip entry. The data from Glover's re-entry is the key. The man who went farther from Earth than anyone in history might also be the man whose flight determines whether anyone goes back. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.